Your monthly subscription box from postflybox.com includes all the materials needed to tie a dozen flies, along with some extra goodies. The Gangster Gurgler is a fly specifically designed to make a ton of commotion on the water's surface when retrieved. It's intended to imitate a wounded, struggling bait fish and thus appear as an easy target for predatory saltwater fish. The fly begins with a 2-aught heavy-duty saltwater hook. After getting the hook firmly secured in the jaws of your tying vise, load a bobbin with a spool of tan unithread. Get the thread started on the hook shank behind the eye, and after taking a few wraps rearward, snip off the excess tag. Continue taking thread wraps down the shank until your thread hangs at about the hook point. For the bottom portion of the fly's tail, tease up, then snip off, down close to the backing, a square inch or so of tan craft fur. Strip the lower, short and fuzzy fibers out of the butt ends. Measure to form a tail a full 1.5 hooks in length, then transfer that measurement rearward to above your tying thread. Anchor the fur to the top of the hook shank with nice tight thread wraps, then lift the butt ends up and snip them off at a shallow angle. Cover the butts with wraps of tying thread. They should gently taper from the base of the tail down to the hook shank. Now, snip and clean a similar sized clump of orange craft fur and align its tips with the tips of the tan fur. Anchor it to the top of the hook shank and trim it off in the same manner as before, then cover the butts with thread wraps. Although you can do it later, now's a great time to add some markings to the tail of the fly. Get hold of a brown permanent marker, and as you pull the craft fur rearward and flatten it out, begin making vertical marks down the tail. Do this on both the near and far side of the fly. Once complete, it should look something like this. For a bit of flash, snip 8 to 10 strands of copper flashabou free from the hank. Measure so the strands extend about a hook gap back from the back edge of the hook bend. While holding the strands against the near side of the hook, anchor them with wraps of tying thread. The flash looks best if it's splayed out a bit. Pull the forward pointing portion of the flash back to the far side of the fly and anchor it there with thread wraps. Once you get these splayed out, snip them off to the same length as the strands on the other side of the fly. Now, pick up one of the saddle hackle feathers and with the shiny or front side facing you, strip away the lower webby fibers until the feather's tip is about 3 inches in length. To ensure the feather wraps correctly, strip a few more fibers from the top of the stem. Lay the bare stem against the near side of the hook and take thread wraps to secure it. Make sure it's bound down really well before snipping the excess butt end of the stem off close. Position your tying thread so it hangs at about the hook point, then start taking forward wraps with the feather behind your thread. 2 or 3 should be plenty. When you get to your tying thread, use it to anchor the feather's tip, then reach in with your tying scissors and snip the excess off close. With your thumb and index finger, preen the fibers down and back, then take thread wraps over top of them to hold them in that position. Don't worry if you have a few escapees. End with your thread about 1/3 of the way down the hook shank. Get hold of some super glue and apply an ample coat over top of the recently done wraps in preparation for the next step. Pick up one of the strips of 2-color foam and with the tan side down, place it on top of the hook shank like so. Begin taking tight thread wraps to secure it there. Make sure the foam is firmly bound down all the way back to the base of the tail. End with your thread at about the midpoint of the hook shank. Separate out an ample clump of the tan SST dubbing and place it on a slightly elevated surface like a book or the top of a post fly box. Using sharp tying scissors, snip the clump into thirds and lay them out along the edge of the raised surface. This will make them as a group easy to pick up for the next step. Pull down on your bobbin to expose a full 5 to 6 inches of tying thread. Place the middle finger of your left hand on the thread at the tip of the bobbin nozzle, then bring the bobbin back up to the hook and go over it. Take a wrap or 2 around the legs of the loop to close them down to a point. Then take a few wraps around the shank. Get hold of the SST dubbing with your right hand as you open the loop with the thumb and index finger of your left. Insert the dubbing between the thread strands, then remove the thumb and index finger of your left hand from the loop and squeeze the strands together to sandwich the dubbing between them. You want to have equal amounts of dubbing on either side of the thread, and it should be spread fairly evenly throughout the length of the loop. Now, reach for a dubbing whirl and insert the hook into the bottom of the dubbing loop. Give the whirl a good clockwise spin as if you're looking down on it. This will cord up the dubbing into a fuzzy brush. Use a bodkin to pick out the dubbing so it's nice and fluffy. Advance your tying thread forward, leaving an eye-length space behind the hook eye. Start taking wraps with a dubbing noodle so the dubbing begins right at the base of the tail. As you wrap forward, sweep the fibers back with the fingers of your left hand. When you reach your tying thread, use it to firmly anchor the dubbing loop, then snip the excess off close. Preen the dubbing down evenly on either side of the fly. Pick up an ample amount of superglue and apply it just above your tying thread. Then, pull the foam first forward over top of the eye, then push some back over top of the tail. In the end, you want about a 1/4 inch of foam extending past the front edge of the hook eye. Begin taking tight wraps of tying thread to anchor the foam to the top of the hook shank. The superglue definitely helps here. Once the foam is well anchored, lift the front portion up and take a couple of thread wraps around just the hook shank. The fly should now look something like this. Pluck a small amount of orange SST dubbing free from the packet and use it to create a slim 1.5-inch long noodle on your tying thread. Pull the foam back once again and this time take wraps with the dubbing noodle to prop it up. Turn the fly over to give yourself easy access to its underside. Snip free a 2-inch length of the clear fishing line, then use a match or a lighter to melt one end into a small ball. Place the line on the underside of the fly with the melted end extending into the hook eye. After taking a couple wraps of tying thread, give the fishing line a little tug so the melted end no longer blocks the eye. Reach for your whip finish tool and use it to do a 5 or 6 turn whip finish behind the hook eye, then seat the knot well and snip your tying thread free. Trim the fishing line so it extends just past the hook point to form a simple but very effective weed guard. Pick up your head cement and apply an ample drop to the thread wraps on the underside of the fly behind the hook eye to ensure they don't come unraveled and to help anchor the weed guard. Use your tying scissors to angle the foam on either side of the fly's head. And that's the Gangster Gurgler. If a final inspection reveals any extra long or wonky fibers, simply snip them off. This is the kind of fly that gets attacked, not just eaten.